The night started like any other. Jake sat on the couch, half watching a football game while absently scrolling through his phone. Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she rinsed dishes from their quiet dinner. Their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm: work, home, occasional date nights, and lazy weekends spent together. It wasn't a storybook romance, but it was solid. Or so he thought. The knock at the door was unexpected. A little too firm, a little too deliberate. Jake glanced at the clock. Nearly 9 p.m. Unusual for a visitor. He hesitated for a second before pushing himself off the couch, stretching as he walked over. When he swung the door open, the last thing he expected to see was the tall, broad-shouldered man standing on his porch. The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable: anger, sadness, maybe even pity. He held himself with a quiet confidence, the kind that made Jake's instincts bristle. Something was off. The air outside suddenly felt heavier. Before Jake could say anything, the man spoke. His voice was measured, controlled, but laced with tension. The name he gave wasn't familiar. But the title that followed sent a chill down Jake's spine. Emily's husband. Jake's brain refused to process the words at first. It had to be a mistake. A prank. Someone messing with him. His fingers tightened around the doorframe as he tried to find a logical explanation, but the stranger wasn't finished. He reached into his coat and pulled out a document, holding it out like a final blow. Jake's heart pounded as he took the paper. The official-looking seal, the signatures, the date: years ago. His wife's name, clear as day, next to this stranger's. Married. Legally bound to another man. The words swam in front of him, his mind struggling to catch up. The room behind him suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. His stomach churned as flashes of his life with Emily played through his head, every laugh, every whispered "I love you," every night spent curled up together in their bed. Had all of it been a lie? He forced himself to look up, his eyes locking onto the stranger's. He wasn't smug. He wasn't gloating. He just stood there, waiting. Jake swallowed against the lump in his throat, fighting to keep his breathing steady. His entire world had just shifted under his feet. A part of him wanted to slam the door, pretend this wasn't happening. But reality had already sunk its claws in. The marriage certificate in his shaking hands was proof enough. Jake closed the door after the stranger left, but the world inside felt just as cold as the night outside. The marriage certificate in his hands weighed more than paper should, as if it carried the full weight of his collapsing reality. He stared at Emily in the kitchen, her back turned as she wiped the counters, completely unaware that her life, their life, had just shattered. The rage bubbling beneath his skin was suffocating, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was no point in confronting her now. Not until he knew the full extent of what she had done. That night, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly, as if she hadn't spent years living a double life. Every time he closed his eyes, memories twisted in his mind, morphing into something sickening. The anniversary trips, the gifts, the whispered confessions of love, had any of it been real? Had he ever really known the woman sleeping inches away from him? The next day, Jake contacted Michael. Their meeting was tense at first, two men, equally betrayed, trying to make sense of the mess Emily had woven between them. But as they pieced together their timelines, something became chillingly clear: she hadn't just been married to both of them. She had been juggling two separate lives, seamlessly moving between them without either man suspecting a thing. Jake listened in stunned silence as Michael revealed his side of the story. The fake pregnancy had been the worst of it. She had claimed to be carrying his child, using it as a tool to extract sympathy, affection, and, more importantly, money. The revelation made Jake's stomach turn. He had no doubt she would have done the same to him if she'd needed to. Determined to uncover the full scope of her deception, Jake started digging. The first discovery came late one night when he checked their joint bank accounts. He had always trusted Emily with their finances, never questioning the transactions beyond the usual bills and expenses. But as he combed through months of records, his pulse pounded harder with each new entry. Large sums of money, thousands of dollars, transferred into an account he didn't recognize. The withdrawals were consistent, stretching back years. She had been funneling money away, preparing for something. An escape, maybe. A new life. Or maybe she had just been ensuring her own security while stringing him along like a fool. Michael found similar discrepancies in his own finances. Emily had drained both men, subtly enough that neither had noticed until now. Jake's next move was to access her phone records. It wasn't difficult, she had always been careless with passwords, confident in her ability to keep her web of lies intact. He sat alone in the dark, scrolling through months of call logs and messages. The first wave of nausea hit when he saw Michael's name. Dozens of messages exchanged with her other husband while she had been sitting right next to Jake, pretending to be the loving wife. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were other numbers. Other men. Some names he recognized, co-workers, an old friend from college she had claimed to have lost touch with. Others were complete strangers. The texts were suggestive, flirtatious, intimate. The kind of messages that left no doubt about what she had been doing behind his back. Jake stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. This wasn't just a case of one woman trying to balance two husbands. This was something worse. Emily was a professional liar. A manipulator who had built an entire life out of deception. She hadn't just betrayed him. She had mastered the art of betrayal. Jake felt sick, but more than that, he felt furious. This wasn't going to end with quiet heartbreak. It was going to end on his terms. Jake had always believed that revenge was a petty thing, something that only the weak pursued to soothe their wounded pride. But as he stared at the pile of evidence stacked neatly on his desk, he realized that this wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. About taking back the dignity that Emily had stolen from him. About exposing her for what she truly was. He wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to beg for answers or explanations. No, he was going to let the truth do the talking. And the truth was damning. The plan had come together quickly. He and Michael, two men bound by betrayal, had worked in quiet synchronicity, both fueled by the same burning need to make Emily pay. She had spent years deceiving them, walking between their lives as if they were nothing more than footnotes in her personal story. She had taken their trust, their money, and their love and twisted it into something ugly. That was about to end. Jake knew Emily well enough to know she loved spectacle. She thrived in places where she could flaunt her perfect life, surrounded by admiring eyes. So, he chose the perfect stage, the upscale restaurant she adored, the one she bragged about visiting with him, where she always insisted on dressing up and playing the role of the sophisticated, devoted wife. He sent her a message the night before, planting the bait. It was their anniversary, after all. He had a special surprise planned, something unforgettable. Michael did the same, luring her into believing that the two men in her life were still dancing unknowingly in her carefully crafted illusion. The rest of the setup was just as meticulous. First, he gathered all the evidence. The text messages, each one a nail in the coffin. The bank transfers that proved her financial deception. The marriage certificates, the undeniable proof of her double life. Screenshots, statements, and timelines, all laid out with the precision of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Then, he made sure the right people knew. Emily had built her image on perfection. She had curated a life where she was the adored wife, the reliable employee, the woman everyone admired. Jake made sure to shatter that illusion. Her boss was the first to receive an anonymous package, copies of the bank statements showing her financial dishonesty, the records of her deception, proof that she had been stealing from her own household to fund her lies. He had checked the company's ethics policy, and there was no doubt, if integrity was a requirement, Emily was about to lose more than just her marriage. Her friends were next. The ones who had defended her, the ones who had smiled knowingly when she spoke of her wonderful husband, but had no idea she meant two different men. Jake made sure they saw the truth before she had the chance to spin her lies. Finally, the divorce lawyer was on standby, ready to strike as soon as the trap was sprung. The stage was set. When the day arrived, Jake sat at his table, the manila folder resting beside his untouched glass of water. Across the room, Michael did the same. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge each other, but they didn't need to. They had already won the war. All that was left was to let Emily walk into her own destruction. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation, soft music playing in the background. Waiters moved between tables, carrying trays of overpriced wine and delicately plated dishes. Then, she arrived. Emily walked in with the confidence of a woman who believed she had everything under control. She was dressed for the occasion, her makeup flawless, her expression warm and composed. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. As she scanned the room, looking for Jake, her smile faltered. Something was wrong. She spotted Michael first. Then her gaze darted across the restaurant and landed on Jake. Her eyes widened, panic flickering behind them for the briefest moment before she forced herself to recover, slipping on the same practiced smile she always used to mask the truth. But there was no escaping this. Not this time. Emily had always been a woman who thrived on attention. She knew how to enter a room, how to command glances, how to make people envy the life she had so carefully constructed. Tonight was no different, at least, in her mind. She walked into the restaurant with her usual air of confidence, her dress tailored to perfection, her smile warm and inviting. She believed she was in control. Then she saw them. Two men. Two husbands. Sitting at separate tables, watching her with unreadable expressions. The moment stretched impossibly long. The color drained from her face, her calculated poise faltering. Her gaze flickered between them, searching for a way out. Then, with an almost imperceptible shake of her head, she turned toward the exit. But she wasn't fast enough. Michael spoke her name first. Loud enough for the room to hear. Heads turned. Conversations died. The restaurant, filled with patrons enjoying their meals, their wine, their quiet conversations, suddenly found a new source of entertainment. Emily froze. Her breath hitched, but she forced herself to turn back, her expression hastily reconstructed into something neutral. She was good at this, pretending, adapting, weaving lies into reality. But even she couldn't erase the sheer disbelief and panic flashing in her eyes. Jake stood first. He reached for the manila folder beside his untouched drink and set it on the table with deliberate precision. The quiet thud might as well have been a gunshot. Emily's fingers twitched at her sides. She hesitated, considering whether she should run, whether she could talk her way out of this. Michael mirrored Jake's actions, pulling out his own folder. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. With slow, reluctant steps, she moved toward the table. She sat. Her posture stiff, her eyes darting from side to side as if looking for an escape route. She opened her mouth, perhaps to lie, perhaps to feign confusion, but the first page of evidence slid in front of her before she could form the words. The messages. The ones she thought had been deleted. The ones that proved she had been playing both men, telling them what they needed to hear to keep them exactly where she wanted them. Then came the bank statements. The quiet siphoning of funds, the unaccounted for expenses, the money funneled into secret accounts under different names. Emily's carefully controlled expression cracked. She shook her head, her hands moving as if to push the papers away, but another document replaced them. The fake pregnancy. The scheme she had played with Michael, manipulating his emotions, using his excitement, his hopes, to extract gifts, money, and sympathy. Her face twisted from shock to anger, her hands clenching into fists. Eyes were on her now. The restaurant had gone deathly silent. Servers hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene. Patrons, who had once been focused on their meals, now turned their chairs slightly, openly observing the unraveling scene before them. Emily's breath came faster, shallow and panicked. She glanced around the restaurant, searching for allies, for someone who might come to her defense. But she found none. Then came the final blow. 2 stacks of paper slid across the table at the exact same time. Divorce papers. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, flipping through the pages. The legal wording might as well have been written in another language, but the message was clear: her reign was over. She had spent years building a world where she was in control. Where she was the one pulling the strings. Where she could weave a web of deception without consequence. Now, in the span of a few minutes, it had all collapsed. Jake leaned back, arms crossed, as he watched her unravel. Michael sat still, his gaze cold. There was no need for yelling, no need for accusations. The truth sat between them, undeniable and damning. Emily swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. She tried once more to collect herself, to salvage what she could, but there was nothing left to save. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, in one sudden movement, she bolted. She stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she rushed toward the exit, her breath coming in short gasps. The restaurant doors swung open, and then she was gone. The eyes that had followed her turned back toward the 2 men left at the table. Some looked amused, others satisfied, a few even sympathetic. But no one spoke. No one needed to. Jake exhaled slowly, reaching for his drink for the first time that night. The game was over. Emily had spent years playing the role of a wife to 2 men. Now, she belonged to neither. The fallout was immediate. The restaurant scene spread like wildfire, whispered from table to table before making its way beyond the building's elegant walls. Within hours, the story had taken a life of its own. Emily, the woman with 2 husbands, publicly exposed for the liar she was. People loved a scandal, and this one had all the right ingredients: deception, betrayal, and the rare spectacle of a liar caught in real time. By the next morning, Emily had already lost control of the narrative. Her boss, an unforgiving man with a strict no-tolerance policy for dishonesty, didn't even need time to consider his decision. The financial discrepancies in her personal life raised questions about her ethics at work. Within a day, she was fired, escorted out of the building like a criminal. The carefully curated professional reputation she had spent years crafting crumbled overnight. Her friends, once eager to sing her praises, turned their backs just as swiftly. People who had envied her seemingly perfect marriage now sneered behind her back. Those who had believed her charming stories about Jake's supposed flaws, his coldness, his emotional distance, now realized they had been nothing more than well-placed manipulations. No one wanted to be associated with a woman who had built her life on lies. The legal battle followed quickly. With all the evidence laid bare, the courts had no sympathy for Emily. Her fraudulent financial activities, her deception, and her reckless disregard for both marriages sealed her fate. She was ordered to repay the money she had stolen, every last cent. The ruling was absolute. Her accounts, once filled with stolen wealth, were drained. The luxuries she had grown accustomed to, the expensive salon visits, the designer clothes, the weekend getaways, vanished. She had no safety net, no one left to manipulate. She was truly alone. Jake, meanwhile, found himself in an unexpected place, not as a victim, but as a man who had reclaimed his life. He and Michael remained in touch. What had started as an awkward alliance of 2 betrayed men turned into something that resembled an odd kind of friendship. They had both survived the same storm, both walked through the same fire. There was no competition between them anymore, no reason to resent each other. In the end, Emily had played them both for fools. But they had emerged stronger. For the first time in years, Jake felt free. Free from the lies. Free from the quiet, gnawing feeling that something had always been off in his marriage. Free from the woman who had taken so much from him. One evening, standing on the balcony of his new apartment, he watched the city lights flicker below. He thought about the man he had been before Emily, the man who had loved without hesitation, who had trusted without fear. That man had been hurt, betrayed beyond what he thought possible. But he had survived. And as he took a deep breath, feeling the crisp night air against his skin, he realized something. Emily might have stolen years from him, but she hadn't won. He had. Because in the end, she was nothing more than a ghost in his past. And he was finally free.